run the community care initiative along with a colleague, and we have monthly meetings with the federal government. Our program is in its 6th year. The problem is, will it continue in the new administration? We now have 15 to 20 sites in the country which use community care models, and we have bundles including things from mental health to intimate partner violence, and our theme this year is hypertension postpartum. So these are my objectives, and I really want to talk about how we're going to achieve an equitable population health workforce by being diverse, inclusive, and so forth. I really want to discuss the threat of the anti-woke movement to medical education and training and health equity as we deal with a multicultural society. I'm going to discuss the Florida legislation for DEI and affirmative action that's occurred to us for the last couple of years, and how we have not gotten around it. We just continue to do the things we need to do by calling it something different. And of course, bias, burnout, policies, system issues, and so forth and so on. So I don't think that many of you actually read through what the Wikipedia definition is. This is the definition that was written in the 1960s for what we're trying to achieve with diversity, equity, and inclusion, even though these have become bad words. How many of us can disagree with recognizing and accepting the differences between people? How can you not understand that people are different in many ways, including race, gender, religion, and more? Gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, age, culture, class, religion, opinion. We are, right? Embracing and celebrating the differences between people. That's the thing that people have a problem with. Embracing and celebrating the differences between people. So what is equity? Fairness and justice. That's all it is. Ensure that everyone has access to the resources and support they need to be successful. If that's what we want for all of our children, we all want that. Recognizing when people face barriers and disadvantages, which if you think about the fact that 56% of all deliveries in this country are on Medicaid, you can't get around that. There are barriers. If you think about the fact that 34% of all counties in the United States do not have a practicing OBGYN, a practicing midwife, or a hospital within 40 miles where obstetric care is given. 34% of all counties in the United States do not have that. Are there people with disadvantages and barriers? Sure they are. If you look outside your window, they are there. So, and trying to allocate resources to help them is about what expansion of Medicaid was all about. An extension to Medicaid to 1 year postpartum. It's what telehealth and telemedicine was all about, which was also one of my task force initiatives when I was president of ACOG, that came into being rather strongly during COVID. We were doing postpartum care through telehealth at all of our public health departments, all of our federally qualified health center clinics. It was very timely. So we're allocating resources to those things and providing individualized support based on people's circumstances. If you are a person who is exposed to intimate partner violence and it's identified, we have to deal with that as a profession, as a group of individuals. Once you identify postpartum depression in the clinic, regardless of which side of the parking lot the person lives on, you got to deal with it. And so inclusion is creating a work environment where everyone feels respected and welcome. We all agree with that, I hope. And promoting the participation of different groups. Everybody's voice is being heard. If you do shared decision-making about contraception or anything else, you have to listen to the person and understand their culture and their environment in order for you to feel how they would accept that. Surveys have shown that community health workers who lived in that community can better provide the resources than people from the big house. You have to go to where people are and where they live. And that's all we're talking about with this. So with that in mind, do we not have a paradigm for what we need to do as providers of making sure that we have an equitable workforce, an inclusive workforce, to talk about our population, particularly when it comes to women's health? If you do not accept everything on this slide, then you do not understand DEI. What did I just say? Cultural competence, cultural sensitivity, language barriers. When we go into a clinic, we have to take people for what they are. And we have to accept that, and so forth and so on. People don't realize you're talking about children with disabilities. And when I was on Capitol Hill arguing for reauthorization of the children's insurance, health insurance program, something you call CHIP, which again is going to come up this year. And I'm sure these are children with disabilities, children who have prostheses, children who need hearing aids, children who need eyeglasses. It's an extension of a Medicaid program. Do you really realize that when I was on the Hill 4 or 5 years ago, there were people who did not want to reauthorize CHIP, and it's been around for 15 years. What? So really? We even had a legislator who herself, her child was on CHIP because he was born with one of our syndromes that the child had an obstructive bladder and had some kidney damage. And as a result, we delivered the kid and stuff like her child was on CHIP and she voted against CHIP. What's wrong with people? You know, I said, I don't make the news. I just report it. So this is the Institute of Medicine. This was written in 2003. The committee found that when social and cultural differences between patients and providers are unappreciated, explored, understood, or communicated in a medical encounter, the result is patient dissatisfaction, poor adherence, poor health outcomes, and disparities in race and in care. And so we really know this, and we've known this for years. And so when you try to dismantle people's thought process, you can't really eliminate a thought process that we lived under in medical education for almost 4 decades now. This is, Dr. Cohen was president of the AAMC when this was written. And this is the Institute of Self. Everybody knows about unequal treatment, confronting racial and ethnic disparities in healthcare. Everybody knows about it. Everybody knows about this report. Everybody knows about the one that talked about injuries and so forth. So, this is the paradigm we have to live under as healthcare providers. We have to understand, in order to be able to carefully take care of a multicultural society of people in Richmond, in Tampa, the referral bases in the hinterlands of Virginia. Let me tell you something. You know, when they come in and say, oh my God, where did she come from? Maybe only 30 or 40 miles away. You know what I'm saying? And so their awareness, if you're doing a clinic in a community, you have to have players around you who are aware of the circumstances, have some sensitivity to the issues, and cultural competence. So Tashina will remember that in our clinic sometime, you know, I had a few high maintenance patients, as she would probably say. These were the PhDs, you know, they were the wannabe high risk people. They really were high risk, but they wanted to be. They hadn't have that. And if they showed up on labor delivery, you know,
we get delivered by the intern.
It's gonna you know, and I remember one of our interns who became an oncologist. She walked in and she introduced herself to one of my patients who was an attorney, as by her first name. And she said, hi, I'm so-and-so, and I'm here to see you for Dr. Brown. I said, you who? And the patient, you know, again, this is a patient who's like, okay, I'm gonna take her. And she said, first of all, are you a doctor or not a doctor? And she said, yes, I'm a doctor. And she said, well, why are you calling yourself by your first name? I don't know who you are. Dr. Brown, well, Dr. Brown sent me in to see you, so, well, Dr. Brown sent you to see me, so I'm pretty sure you're okay. So anyway, no, make a long story short, she was only there to be checked out. There was nothing wrong with it anyway. But she called me, she said, I just gave your intern a lesson. She looks like she's 12. She's walking in here and she said that she's gonna see a lawyer, even though I'm one of the good lawyers. I said, you should not have treated her. It's been nice to her. She said, well, I said, was she good? Oh, yes, she took great care of me. I said, that's fine. All right. So again, being aware of your surroundings, being sensitive, and also being respectful. And that was really what we learned from them. So this is the Flexional Report. We need to bring it back to some degree. This was written in 1910, and it was really about OBGYN more than anything else. And so it decided which medical schools should stay open and closed for Blacks and women were not worth being saved. Are we at a point again where women are not worth being saved? Again, we're talking about diversity, right? We don't encompass the whole aspects of it. 6 of the 8 Black medical schools were closed, and the majority of the schools had, any school that had admitted any women was closed. Not being worthy of being educated medically. And this is before the Great Flu epidemic. They killed a lot of people. And so J.N. Williams of Baltimore in 1910 conducted a study on obstetric training in the United States. The majority of schools offered poor obstetrical training. And physicians were just as responsible for the high maternal mortality rate as midwives, because the majority of deliveries in the South were done by midwives at the time. And encouraged an upgrade of obstetric training for both physicians and midwives, and that's where we began to spring up. The American Board was formed in 1933. The American College was formed in 1950. It still took 20 years from this report for us to get our standards together for how to take care of pregnant women in this country. Okay? So what are we trying to do now? We're trying to turn back the clock on reproductive health care 110 years later, so that people cannot get quality evidence-based care. So think about that. And who's making these decisions? Not women. Okay, they're not. So how do we include an equitable workforce? In the 70s, it was about affirmative action. I'm proud to say that I would not have gotten into Wake Forest without some plans for affirmative action. Not that I wasn't qualified to go to Wake Forest. No. I just looked at the picture of Larry Hopkins up there, who was a year ahead of me, who trained here. Larry went back to Winston-Salem. He had a successful practice, was on the faculty. Unfortunately, he died a couple of years ago. And I took that picture so I could send it to his wife, Beth. But again, people had to let you in, but they didn't have to let you finish. And I could tell you some stories, trust me. But then again, in 2020s, we're fighting old paradigms of what it means to be woke. This was the sign in my office when I first got to the University of South Florida. It was my Office of Institutional Equity. Appreciating diversity and affirming equity. That sign is no longer gone, it's now gone because of the paradigms. But there's no sign. But does that mean there is no equity? There are two different things. President of the university, I don't care what you want. I don't care what you call it, just do what you do. And since I'm on Social Security, I really don't care. When you got a job, you can get a job. You live on that Social Security fairly well. So I didn't tell her. So, but she understood it because I've known her and she's an attorney. So here's the deal. So the United States court has settled a decade-long debate over affirmative action. We knew it was going to happen. But public and private universities may normally use race and ethnicity as a factor when deciding who gets in. That's not new. That's not new. The decision will reshape admissions in many of the nation's top universities but will have little impact in Florida. And the reason I say that is because race-conscious admissions have been banned in the state of Florida since 1999. And that is the executive order signed by Governor Jeb Bush. So Florida really hasn't used race in college admissions since 1999. At least they say they haven't. But they do use circumstances, environmental circumstances, like first generation people going to college. And again, when you're in a state like Florida and you have all these public universities, they also enacted something very similar to the state of Texas, and that if you were in the top 10% of your class of any high school, that you must be admitted to any one of the state institutions. That's a powerful statement in itself. So it didn't do everything. So did that eliminate people from going to college? No, it didn't. It just said that you had to use criteria that were appropriate. And when I've been on the Hill, I've learned how slippery you need to be when you're talking to legislators. Here's a challenge that we had. In 1920, about one Black physician for every 3,000 Black people compared to 500 whites. And in 2014, there were less Black men applying to medical school than it was the year I graduated in 1978. And only 3% of all physicians were Black men, and the barriers were identified by the AAMC as social education and counseling. So this was the report from 2021, which I'm sure, Dr. Your chairs were familiar with from the AAMC. And basically, for the first time, we've tracked the figures. Most of the 2022 applicants were not white. Applicants who could choose more than one racial ethnic category. And in fact, keep in mind that 8 to 10% of the population consider themselves as 2 or more races. And so which one you pick is really makes a big difference. And here are the figures from the largest categories, the way medical school admissions looked like then. 50%, 25%, 11.7%, 11.7%. And these are up compared to what they were, particularly looking at the largest racial ethnic categories, and Asians went up, whites went up, but Latinos and Blacks also went up to a minimal degree in the number of people. And this is the first time it had happened in a decade. So you might ask, with all these efforts that were being done, what happens now? Well, Stephen Miller has already tried to attack the University of South Florida. You don't know who that name? You don't know that name? Stephen Miller is the chief of staff for Donald Trump, who was in the first administration. He's a dookie. We don't claim him. He's also claims to be Jewish, but we'll see. So he's now back. He's now back in the administration, and he has actually looked at all the data from his alma mater, including Duke, accusing us of having admitting people to the medical school who are not qualified. Okay, and of course we showed the data, and it's clearly not the case. And so anyway, you can debunk him all as one. Doesn't mean he's going to stop. Does not mean he's going to stop. We just have to keep doing what we do as medical schools. This is us at the University of South Florida. The dean and I are very proud of the fact that if we look at our mean MCAT scores, what they are, what we are for GPAs, and we recruit from all over the country. We are now, this year's class is more female than male. Our diversity in numbers look what they look like, and underrepresented numbers were 23%. 43% of our students are from Florida, 57% from out of state, and our residencies are similar to that. Takes a lot of work. Takes a lot of work. So when I look at this, and this is what the dean and I often have to explain, because we looked at this percentage here that occurred in 2023, and this was in the heat of Ron DeSantis's disgust with people. And so the president said, hey, y'all are bragging about this thing, we're gonna da, da, da. I said, we're only bragging about the fact that these people come from this group, and we're getting some of the most qualified people in the country. And I said, I would just say, please say thank you for representing the university well. And so when we explained it that way, she said, oh, okay. Well, why did this bring attention to us? Wokeness, anti-woke. And I've been hearing this term woke since I was an adolescent growing up in Eastern North Carolina. Watch your surroundings, son. Make sure you're not out after so time on these two-lane highways down here. Make sure you get home safely, And if you're not home by 11 o'clock, I'm coming to look for you. What you do if you? Well, that's another whole chapter. But what was long history originally means awareness of racially motivated threats and awareness of issues concerning social and racial justice. That's what my father was talking about. He's knocking around on Tobacco Road. Yeah. Still Road is used within the Black community and social justice campaigns to refer being alert and aware of societal inequities. Okay. Stay in the way. You know, Chris Rock used to say, who in the world at 11 o'clock at night walks up to a bank teller, one of those little machines in ATMs, and expect someone not to be behind them trying to take their money? It's just stupid. Why are you going to do that? You're just asking to get your money taken. Chris Rock said that. I said, and since then, I never go to bed. I always go inside. I always go inside to get my little bit of money. I never drive, unless I'm in the driveway, I never walk up, because you never know who's going to be behind you. Early versions of steering woke has been, and that's steering woke, is it not? Been used since the 100 years ago. Was spoken in the outcry of 1930 song, when the Scottsboro Boys. If anybody from Alabama understands the Scottsboro Boys, there's a play about that. They were accused, 9 teenagers accused of raping 2 white women, turned out not to be true, and led verdict urged, as they woke, keep their eyes open at the conclusion of the song. So now what? It's now best known as a negative political buzzword used to describe anything deemed to be too liberal or progressive, like brands that support Pride Month. The Little Mermaid, what's she done? What has she done? She's just a cartoon character. And teaching about race in schools. Ban some books. I heard a minister say the other day, instead of banning books, shouldn't we be banning guns? He actually is a pastor here in Alexandria, Virginia. And so I heard him speaking. He's actually amazing. So the new anti-woke crusade targets DEI, Bud Light, Disney, and workforce inclusion. That's us. So the implications for us are providing obstacles to achieve an inclusive workforce for our benefit of population and public health. And we can't allow that. We can't. We will not. We will not back down on what our obligation is, and to our Hippocratic oath, and that is to take care of everyone regardless of their circumstance. That's what we say. So our Sergeant Surgeon General, you've probably heard of him, General Joseph Lapito, said the term health equity has been taken on a political meaning that is unhelpful in addressing the important health issues related to race and ethnicity. It's an imprecise term, he says, and he leads our current Florida Department of Health. Keep in mind, Ron DeSantis hired him because he had to oust the other guy that said that we ought to be tested for COVID, trying to save lives. So he hired this guy. All right? He's an anti-vaxxer. And so we invited him to the Florida Medical Association meeting. We would let him come. He couldn't get invited to his own state meeting. Because the FMA said, we don't want you here, you're too controversial. So anyway, so the governor removed health equity from the Florida healthcare priorities, dropping it to number 8. So I was asked to comment on it, and I said, well, if you're not for equity, you're for inequity. That was my own comment for the paper. President said, he said, well, I said, well, this is just a quote. I said, if you're not for equity, you're for inequity. By default. And that became, governor didn't call, but this is what I did. I said, well, let me look through the health priorities. I'm not worried about that. I said, because as long as the things on the list are still the things that we care about, that's okay. So breast and cervical cancers were still on the list for things that we had to make priorities. Prostate cancer was still on the list. Alzheimer's was still on the list. All those types of things. He wanted number one to be Alzheimer's. I'm okay with that. But he didn't eliminate any of the things that we were addressing. Buzzwords. You can't get yourself, your panties all in a tight short. You go to your state legislature and you figure it out. Because ultimately, they are people too. And their constituents are their neighbors, the same people they go to church with. And you just have to be able to talk with them. Florida adopted an anti-COVID testing and anti-vaccination policy, including threatening cruise ships amid the COVID epidemic and record COVID hospitalizations and deaths, including in hospitals. We invented the little 3D testing thing. And so the governor came down there to taunt all the things we'd done at USF. And so Charlie had to be with him. I didn't. And because I didn't have to, he said, you gotta come. I said, no, I don't want to be on television. I don't want to be on TV. I'm just the dean in the dean's office. I'm sure I'm meeting with some faculty who's complaining about the South. What the Flexion report also did was identify quackery. It's the promotion of cures, remedies, and other types of medical benefits that are not proven to work. Crack down on quackery. The word quack itself comes back to the 17th century, appearing since 1620. Do you think we need another book on this? With who our HHS person is? Do you think he ain't a physician, so he can't even be appointed? But the people who are advising him are. And if you look at what's happening with freezing NIH funding, my whole university is in uproar right now. Although it's been put on hold for a while. So anyway, be careful what you ask for. You might get it. And I think you have. So I'm going to do one more thing. Critical race theory. Not taught in public schools to K-12. Not even taught in many colleges. But now it's been banned according to the latest executive order this past week in all K-12. So you're looking for a problem that really doesn't exist. 8 states passed legislation against critical race theory, including Oklahoma, Idaho, Tennessee, Texas, Iowa, New Hampshire, Arizona, and South Carolina. 20 additional states introduced a plan to introduce an anti-CRT laws. Texas is going crazy about everything, and they banned any attempt to claim that slavery and racism are not deviations from the founding principles of the English. What? Just read the English and kind of go from there, right? It's all right. So I told someone the other day, and I come from a family of educators in Hyde County in the eastern part of the state of North Carolina. And so my great-great-great-grandfather was born down in 1814, Benjamin Gray. My great-grandfather started one of the first public schools in Hyde County for colored people in 1869. Okay. Which, by the way, I've been told that half of the student body were illiterate whites and illiterate blacks and children. So it was all integrated for everybody to learn how to read. He'd been taught to read, basically, and was very good at it. And so that's the key. So the ACGME reaffirmed its commitment to the requirements to focus on diversity through mission-driven and ongoing systemic efforts of recruitment and retention of diversity, includes a workforce of residents, fellows, faculty, and other relevant members of the academic community. And that's still my job. That's still my job. The rationale for this is to hold true to the ACGME's mission to improve health and population health. Elimination of racial and ethnic health disparities is essential to improving health and society, and the requirements do not require race-based affirmative action to achieve diversity, and the decision does not require programs to change their current selection process. We went through that this year, although we did a holistic approach to residents because we didn't look at anybody's pictures. This is why reading personal statement is so important. I remember sitting in my office, don't tell anybody this, but I'd be reading personal statements and I just, so, what am I reading? Y'all didn't know that now, but the reality is I read so many personal statements over the years, and then I said, well, this personal statement is not personal. Okay? All right. So anyway, that's another whole chapter. But also, if anyone interviewed with me, back in the day, I used to have a what we called a what do I call it, Tashima? The little forum that I would do with all the residents, that all the applicants would come in, and I'd sit down and kind of peel
Like your room.
Yeah.
Kind of like your resident room.
Yeah. We would just do like I never interviewed anybody. I let them interview me. That's because everybody else was doing the interviewing. And so basically, I just had a little forum where they all sat around in the room, and I had a court gesture, one of the residents when people were going in and going out. And I sat there for 3 hours just basically talking to people. And they were talking to each other and they learned about each other. And they said, well, aren't you going to interview us? I said, just did it. And I'd ask them things like, what is the last nonfiction book that you read? I'd ask crazy things like, tell me about a patient who made you cry. You know? And God knows I've had a lot. For a lot of different reasons. And so, what was I after? Passion and compassion. Passion and compassion. I'm not saying do this now because people report you. So anyway, these are the common requirements. So let me get into a little bit of this, because Title VII is civil rights law, and this is another thing that's being trying to be eliminated right now. And this is about unlawful employment practices by an employer, fail to refuse to hire or discharge an individual, otherwise to discriminate against any individual, respect to compensate, This is another thing that's being, we want to undo Title VII, which gives you the right to sue if you're discriminated. Okay, so be careful what you ask for. You might get it because Stephen Miller don't care about you. Okay, he don't care how you look. He don't care about you, and that is his premise. So now, here was Florida's executive order in 1999, and our governor's plan was similar to Bush's. And so in 1999, 23% of Florida public school seniors were Black. That fell to just 18% of undergraduate freshmen were Black. In 2007, 22% of high school seniors are Black, and our share of freshmen has dropped to 15%. And again, but that's also across all populations, particularly when it comes to men. Fewer men are going to college. We don't know what they're doing, but they're going to college. Over the last 2 decades, one Florida initiative, significant gains have been occurring among Hispanic students, because in order to be a Hispanic designated institution in the state of Florida, 25% of your freshmen have to be Hispanic. We haven't eliminated that, nor are we ever going to eliminate it. It's written into the law. So regardless of what these things say, you have to do what you do. And I'm going to skip that one, because I want to go through some of our legislature that I had to deal with over the last year. The general education core courses may not distort significant historical events, including a curriculum that teaches identity politics. It violates that. What the hell is identity politics? So our Board of Health said, we don't know what that is anyway, Dr. Brown, don't worry about it. That's what the Board of Trustees said. Or is based on theories that systemic racism, sexism, oppression, and privilege are inherent in the Constitution of the United States and were created to maintain social, political, and economic inequities. What in the heck does that mean? I read it 10 times and I still can't figure out what they're trying to do, or what they wanted me to do as a VP for Institutional Equity. So this was a higher education, SB 266. Student fees to support student-led organizations are permitted notwithstanding any speech or expressive activity by such organizations. Programs, campus activities, and function require compliance with general and federal laws and regulations, obtaining and retaining institutional and discipline-specific accreditation within an approved program. So and basically, if you have a separate accreditation society like the ACGME and so forth and so on, the nursing schools, you had to follow your accreditation standards, okay? Access programs for military, the exception was always these programs. Pell Grants, veterans, first generation college students, non-traditional students, whatever that means anymore, 2+2 transfers from one of our junior colleges, and students from low income families and students with unique abilities. These were all exempt. That's really the only thing I really cared about, plus some other things. And so even though I eliminated my title, I didn't eliminate my job. And the Board of Governors were required to adopt these regulations. And then had an Office of Public Policy that you had to create on your campus, which we did. The office must organize, publicize state debates or group forums defined into law, must address from multiple divergent and opposing perspectives an extensive range of public policy issues widely discussed and debated in society at large. That didn't change anything that I was doing already. I just changed the name of the office. Okay.
So what's the new office name?
My new office is Culture and Environment.
Got it.
Okay. All right. Culture and Environment. Must include speakers who represent widely held views on opposing sides of widely discussed. We had to have these forums occur on campus. And I'm gonna skip through this one because they're all kind of silly. So this is Dr. Atlet. She's a pediatrician. She's a member of the National Academy. And this is what she presented last year at our AGOS meeting. Achieve greater representation of physician workforce must address diversity in an unprecedented fashion, which requires intentional, longitudinal commitments to multiple levels from individual physicians to the entire profession. That's us. Challenge every pediatrician to engage and join forces with others within the medical sector and beyond to amplify these individual efforts. You have an obligation to provide the best population health care that you can to the individuals who walk inside of this building, which I know are very, very different. From race, from ethnicity, from language, from everything else, just as they are in Florida. You have an obligation to make sure that your staff and your trainees and your faculty represent the best in order to care for those patients. You know when you have to get an interpreter, because I don't speak any other language other than Southern broken English. That's me. And so I remember being in one of my clinics, my postpartum clinics, and this is maybe before she was there. And we had a person, and she spoke only Spanish, and we didn't have a Spanish interpreter in the clinic that day because they're the first to go, budget cuts go. And so I was on the phone, and her 10-year-old was there. And he said, well, Dr. Brown, I can tell you what she's saying. I think that postpartum clinic is a place that I really want you to speak to. I said, they're going to do that on the phone. And so I would ask my questions on the phone, and he would be telling his mother, he's asking so and so and so. And I said, he's over there not get me in trouble here, because you cannot interpret. You can't do it. And he was just as sweet as he could be. But true enough, he was better than the person on the phone. And she trusted him more than she did the person on the phone. So we got good information. So this is what we did at the Florida Council of Medical School Deans to address our workforce. Now, I am the co-chair of what used to be the Diversity Committee, which is now called Healthcare Excellence. And we worked this out at the Florida Medical Association meeting that we did invite Judge Amico to. Our Surgeon General. Our mission is to address population health and diverse workforce pathway programs to address diversity in the applicant pool for healthcare providers. And so in reality, all of our pathway programs were at risk. And we have many throughout the state, many of them associated with schools. and so forth and so on. And the Florida Council of Medical and School Deans includes every dean and every representative from every medical school, public and private, in the state of Florida. So we changed our name to Healthcare Excellence. Who could argue against that? How do you get healthcare excellence? You only get healthcare excellence if you have a workforce that can meet those needs. So my office changed its name, and we were able to do that to culture and enrichment, and we had it codified by our faculty council and a task force. And so the faculty council codified this, and as a result, this is now how we address our issues. And who can argue against culture and environment? You know? But we no longer have a person who's dedicated to it. We have a council that's dedicated to it. Isn't that slippery? As long as it works, that's what we do. We have programs that are wonderful programs. This is the best program. It is a brain expansion colostomy training program that we support, and the university supports, and all other people support. And it basically is about bringing skills to people who want to be physicians. And we have a program that's been around for decades. Dexter Friedrich had wrote this book, and I was just on the phone with him the other day. You know, we are principal sponsor. All the healthcare agencies in Tampa as principal sponsors of this program. They bring these kids to campus in different places, and they practice skills and so forth and so on, a lot of volunteers. So Dexter is fantastic. We just had a partnership meeting with another program in Philadelphia that we are going to present this year at the NMA. This is something that was published not too long ago, why Black doctors are leaving faculty positions in academic medicine. Not just Black physicians, but a lot of physicians, particularly in the climate now, where it's so hard to meet your goal. And so I think that it really gives us an opportunity to kind of revisit what being here at this institution really means. You know you can make more money, right? But what's the difference if you're only in the 0.5% of earners in the world? The top 0.5% or the top 1.5%? I don't know about difference. I had to remind one of our GI surgeons that the other day who was berating me in the cafeteria about the new compensation plan. I said, I really didn't come over here to meet with you, number one. I said, and this, of all the things going on, this is why I got your shorts tight. I said, you have your RVUs at so-and-so. I said, you keep the work, and I remember RVUs you have, you're going to be paid boatloads of money in the new compensation plan. And I was very nice about it. I said, just say thanks. Because then I went and met with somebody who was having some real problems. But he's a friend of mine. He said, I don't understand this company plan. I said, well, your chairman had to explain it to you real well. I said, that's not my problem. I'm not your chair. If you're having problems understanding how much more money you're going to make in the new compensation plan, that ain't my fault. But I can guarantee you one thing. If you continue to work and don't do any teaching, you're going to do a lot. You can get a lot. Well, I teach. I said, okay. Judge opposed race consideration in the Naval Academy until recently. Barriers to medical education. This is one of my little things that was given to me. Who's Haywood? No one really knows. I actually wrote my whole chapter on that for the clinics of North America that they asked me to write about who I am. Ambassadors. I think I've been an ambassador. Representing race, yeah, the minority tax. This double consciousness, the struggle to endure as people of color endure to navigate between others' expectations based on race of American history versus of who they really are. I think it took me about a few decades to sort of decide that I was going to represent who I am rather than what other people wanted me to represent. Okay. Don't wait that long. Yeah. I got a lot more out there when my mother passed away at age 98. I said, you know, I don't have to disappoint anybody. Person, I told her, the only person that would be disappointed in what I'm doing is dead. Get over it. The only real person that I would care to disappoint was gone at age 98. I said, okay. I wasn't gonna be mean about it. I just wasn't gonna do things by other people's standards because they wanted me to do them. Combating and navigating negative stereotypes and accurate perceptions of perception of feeling exhausted and angry. What does that do? Except beat you down. Everything right now is designed to beat you down, to make you feel not worthy. That's the message that we cannot allow our medical students, our college students, and anybody to adopt. You are not worthy of breathing because you look different, you're of a different gender, you act differently, you're from a poor community. You got to not let that happen to your children and their friends. You just can't do it. Barriers, we see them. Adverse life experiences do matter. Impacting underrepresented faculty and validation, these are all real, very real. Bias in grading, comparing, for instance, to summary statements. I'm three students right now. And I just did my clerkship direct, identified 2 students who want to go into OBGYN, or which I refer to as women's health. And I don't know them and I don't grade them, but anyway. And I said, well, you know, the first thing that I want to tell you is if you're on your rotation, you need to shoot for getting an HP on honors on this rotation if you want to go to OBGYN. It's very competitive. I said, you got to think about what it takes to do that other than the shelf exams. Don't stand behind the door, making people come and look for you. Don't be like the student that I had at Duke that I asked to come back and help me do a cyclogy and said, I already seen one of those. When I told the chief, just told me to say, I said, the chairman of the department is going to work supply. And the student said to the chairman of the department, you already seen those. I wasn't going to ask him to do it. I was just asking him to hold some damn retractors. I said, that's okay. I just want you to know that that's what he said to me. I don't grade the student. I just walked out. And she said, told Dr. Brown, you know who that is? Well, Dr. Brown's the chairman. Well, I had seen one. I said, okay. You sit there and the other student jumps up and said, well, I'll go. Who do you think the student is that got the honors? Okay. In 4-6 required clerkships, grading disparities account for confoundings between white students, underrepresented students, and so forth and so on. Students elected to AOA and so forth. Factors other than performance and standardized intent impact grading on clinical basis of medical school. So let's move on. So we have to make some changes in the system in order for us to improve. And this is a paper that was published that I would ask you to read in the New England Journal from August 5th, 2021, looking at bias in training. Since we have to have lectures on the history of the Flexus report. You want to know what it is, written in 1910, particularly part of crackery. How prevalent is that right now? You got to read it. It's amazing. Crazy people out there, some of them being physicians. You know? We got to deal with it. Morning report should demonstrate effects like we do. We bring out all things in morning report. The person's environment plays a role, that social circumstance plays a role. And Tashima would tell you that one of the things that used to happen in my clinic was that I'd be in clinic and, you know, be small, right? And the person from the front desk would call back there and say, Dr. Brown, Miss So-and-so is 15 minutes late. Do you still want to see her? They didn't ask how many buses she had to take. They didn't ask whether she had a child care problem. They didn't ask whether she came from Fayetteville, which is 90 miles away, and took the bus for her high-risk problem. They just knew she was late. And I said, I'm still here. And it looks like I'm gonna be here until 6 o'clock once I finish doing all these epic charts. So why don't you sign her in? And don't call me about stuff like that. Well, one of your partners wouldn't see her. I said, well, I'm not one of my partners, but I need to know who that is. And my partnership group won't see her because I will fix that immediately. As I used to say in the clinic, I don't expect favoritism, special things. But if things ain't working for me in clinic, I can't be working with other faculty. I say, because they know I have to run off to a dean's meeting. Now I have to do this. I need chop, chop, chop. I need to get things done. I can't have stupid questions come my way like, am I going to still see her? I got to see her because you don't know what kind of problem she's got. She could be in DKA right now. You don't know that. So anyway, that's the philosophy I had in clinic, and they would tell you, I saw everybody. They saw everybody. I was going to keep the same clinic again. Right, never let people violate duty hours. No, I'm fine. I will take care of this myself. I never ask anybody to do anything that I'm not willing to do myself. Now, I will tell you a true story. One of our former residents, Dan Krause, I knew that son. So Dan is now a program rep in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And when he was an intern, he was swamped. Everybody's there. I said, well, Dan, what can I do to help you? I was up all night anyway. And he said, I said, where's your chief? Oh, I can't call the chief because they'll think I'm not competent. I said, well, you're not competent right now. You're not competent. He said, what can I do to help? He said, well, could you see your patient who came in triage? I said, sure, I'd be happy to see her. I said, I would save you some time and so forth and so on. I said, but I'm not going to get up and help you clean out triage. You're going to have to call your chief to come and help you clean it out, whether you're competent or not. So anyway, achieving excellence in medical education. Diversity, 20 years by Maya Angelou and John Kennedy. Confronting bias. This is basically what we're talking about. Inherent part of American culture. To deny that racism doesn't exist in the United States by two political candidates from South Carolina really bothered me. Both of them being people of color. One of them being Tim Scott and the other one being Nikki Haley. Wait a minute. Okay. Martin Luther King said this, of all the forms of inequity and equity in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane. This was a forum that was held recently about equitable access to care, how healthcare could be made more equitable story by these people from women, and they said all women. And this is what DEI stands for me. Okay. Hell yeah. Don't have anybody to disappoint except my mother, and she's gone. And this guy, Adam Pearson, was supporting the vulnerable and the weak, make you woke, put me in handcuffs and take me to jail because I'm guilty. And this is, of course, the beautiful Alicia Keys. DEI is not.
You with an up-to-date
What's that?
slide.
What's that?
Look at you with an up-to-date slide.
Oh. And DEI has been weaponized by bad-faced arguments in the dogma of so-called mediocrity in women and underrepresented people. In 2025, Mark Zuckerberg calling for a more masculine workplace, and the Trump administration striking down diversity initiatives in public and private spaces. So as a society, we must devise new ways of discussing the benefits of a diverse team and leadership and new strategies for pushing framework forward in a climate that is pushing back hard. The value of diversity and inclusion will persist and will survive this assault by those who deny the relevance and benefits to a multicultural society. And that's all I have for you today. Help others, even when you know they can't help you back. Okay? That's what we do. All right, that's it. That's me and Joe Luciana. Fighting a good fight back in the day. I was at a hockey game. I don't like hockey. Being on Capitol Hill, a few years ago. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Shima.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for a breath of fresh air and a moment of
Craziness.
feeling really down on how things are going.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you can allow that to happen. Don't allow it to happen to you. They want you to feel defeated.
Yeah.
They want to beat you down. They want you to say you are not worthy. They want you to feel like a piece of shit. And you know you're not. You know, and once it starts to identify, get into your psyche, how can you deliver your best message to your patients? And that is, I used to say to the people all the time, I know we have baggage. I would say this on labor and delivery to the nursing staff. I said, but the patients got more baggage than we do. So you just got to put your baggage aside today, at least for now. And when you feel like you're overwhelmed, go to the corner and hit your head against the wall or something and say, shake me out of this. Because I got this lady out here who's going to bleed. You know, I got to do what I got to do. You got to be as good at 2 a.m. as you are at 2 p.m. because you don't know when the lady's going to erupt. You know, yeah, you got baggage. So when they're trying to make you carry additional baggage up here, you have to break it down. Find a resilient strategy. You know, I cycle every day. I just spin cycling every day. I do it 5 days a week, 7 days a week if I can. And I basically, they turn the crazy music on and I just go wild with people, yelling and screaming. And I say, don't call me Dr. Brown in class because I'm not Dr. Brown. I'm just crazy HB. Other questions and comments? Yes, sir.
Sorry, I'm new, it's my first day here, so.
That's all right, you good.
And we met, so wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Very, very much. USF is a wonderful place. My question is about, because obviously you're MFM, your expertise is more of the obstetrical side.
Right.
One thing that bothered me for years with women with cancer, I'm an oncologist.
Mhm.
Hospitals get paid a lot more
Well, radical prostatectomy is in a radical extraction.
for 340B pricing.
Uh-huh.
They buy the drugs,
Uh-huh.
discounted prices, and charge through the.
Uh-huh.
However, because they take care of people with Medicaid, uninsured or uninsured, but they don't want those patients.
I know, some of them.
Some do, but the vast majority don't.
Mhm.
Because once you walk through the door,
Yeah.
you get treated. It's wonderful, but
Right.
you have to get there.
Right.
And I think, yeah, obviously government has to step in and do stuff, but it's also at local level because they get for deliveries, Medicaid pays the same no matter what.
Right,
But for cancer, it's having a money printing machine
yeah, it
in
is.
the basement,
Yeah, our cancer center is all
but
about
it's
that.
not working. And it bothers me so bad.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's why, obviously.
Well, I think that really you've hit the nail on the head, and that is inequity in certain types of conditions. The cancer care is one of them. So we have a cancer center as well. It's printing money. It's printing money. It's hospital based. But we don't, and of course, the patients get a bill whether they got money or not. They get a bill.
Yeah.
They don't have to pay it, but they do get a bill. And I think that that's really the challenges that we have in our healthcare delivery system. There's no such thing as a non-for-profit system, one, the all-for-profit. Now, again, this is my biggest problem with obstetric care. I'm in the process of, my next big thing is unbundling obstetric.
Oh. Sorry. In medicine that gets paid for 10 months of care in one fell.
To the back of the room here.
Oh my God, sorry, I had to freak out about that. on this call.
$833.33 if you're on Medicaid in Virginia and Florida, maybe a little.
Well, in VCU, actually, it's unbundled.
Yeah, it is unbundled. So we're working on unbundling obstetric. And the reason I want to unbundle it because I want the postpartum visit to count for
Yes.
dollars. I think the reason that, and we've done very well since we had a postpartum paradigm of being able to get 72% of people in this country to have a postpartum visit before 6 weeks. So that's been a big deal. It's happened. But the problem is it's happening, but there's no extra payment for that visit. And so we want 2 visits that need to be, eliminate 2 or 3 of the unnecessary prenatal visits and pay for that.
Yeah, we
So
also
that's
need
what I
to
mean
pay
by
for this.
unbundling care. And so, but from your perspective, you know, this is the problem. Hospitals have packages for things like transplant. They have all those type of things because they make all their money, they pay all the physicians. The challenge is, you're right, we prefer that patient at certain institutions to not show up. Because we don't have to worry about dealing with the fact that they don't have any resources. But that's unrealistic in a community. And so this is why at TGH, where our CEO just put out an email about what it means to be in a community and to take care of everybody, regardless of their ability to pay. That's what we're supposed to do. That's what this place does. You know?
Is it?
Huh?
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, I used to get so tricky when I used to run the continuity clinic. And that was, we had to always justify lady with fibroids having, hysterectomy because she didn't have any money. I'm gonna tell you all this trick, but don't you use it because I swear I deny it. And I used to tell the resident, next time she comes into the emergency room and she's bleeding like crazy, admit her to the hospital. And I guarantee you, she will get her hysterectomy. Because she needs it. So you have to be sneaky. And so, well, if they ask you, who told you to do that? Tell them that the chairman of the department told you to do it. Some still wouldn't do it.
Oh,
Because if you're creative, you gotta get a certain number of hysterectomies as a resident.
That part.
Opportunity you get, when one needs the hysterectomy, you take advantage of it. That's provided equity here. I thank you for your question. All right, what are you all? So you're motivated?
Yeah.
You're ready to roll? You want to get things done? All right?
Still not sure. We got it.
You got it.
Optimism.
99% of what we do is caring. That's the key. 99.9% of what we do is care. And if you think about it that way, then you're gonna be fine. Don't get defeated. I refuse to allow myself to do that. That's why I keep these programs going. And you have to do the same thing. The medical, who are the medical students in heaven?
No, we went to asking.
Oh, they have a test. Oh, they have to do something important, like take a. That's part of the deal, though. It's LCME for you, right? I'm not gonna argue. Hey, David, thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, your talk was wonderful, and I am so grateful that you came. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Okay, I want to catch up with you. I'm on the 75th anniversary committee for ACON. So I need to get some ideas.
I was letting it get I was like, thank you. You see my opening picture.
Expectations. Think about, look at any.
And then I'll do my. Can you hear me?
Your volume is on, I just can't hear you, I think, because there's just background noise.
Tag it also to the office. So
Can you try speaking again?
they have a good day when they come out. And there's other
Does
six.
anyone know where Allison is?
Shoot, we just
saw
saw
her.
it.
You
Yeah.
guys just mind shooting her a quick message.
When you were yelling like that, I can hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me now.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Now we can hear you. So
Yes. Okay, good.
what I was saying is that I have shared or changed the share capability, so you should be able to share your slides. And we're gonna get started now.
All the time.
Perfect. Let me share.
Okay, thank you so much.
Medicated extension.
No, now you guys see presenter mode. Let's see. No. Try this. Okay, it looks like you guys can just see the slides now, nothing annoying. No presenter mode. Good to start. You can hear me okay?
Sorry, we can see your slides.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we're going to first cover recurrent pregnancy loss and antiphospholipid antibody syndrome. And then after that, we're going to do premature ovarian insufficiency. With recurrent pregnancy loss, I do see a lot of patients with this. Sometimes they come to see MFM, sometimes we kind of work together, but we're going to go through your all's learning objectives, which are to define recurrent pregnancy loss, discuss the diagnosis, and then talk about what testing you do for workup of recurrent pregnancy loss, and then treatment options. So the definition of recurrent pregnancy loss per ASRM, which is the one that I always use, is that you've had 2 or more previous failed pregnancies. And in their guideline, they do define this as clinical pregnancies, meaning it was either seen on ultrasound or you had a pathologic diagnosis, so basically excluding chemical pregnancies. However, in March of 2020, ASRM did update their definitions of infertility and recurrent pregnancy loss. It was actually very inclusive, where they before previously, as I'm sure you all know, infertility is after 1 year of trying with unprotected intercourse, or 6 months if you're over age 40. But they changed it to say, like, anyone who's unable to conceive due to lack of sperm or lack of egg or other issues. So basically being inclusive of same-sex couples and other people. But in that document, the new one, when they give the updated definition of RPL, they don't actually have that qualifier that you have to, yet you wouldn't consider chemical pregnancies. They just say each pregnancy loss merits careful review to determine whether specific evaluation of the woman or couple may be appropriate. So this is my approach that I take. I don't think a chemical pregnancy is as significant, obviously, as an ultrasonographic or, like a pathologically diagnosed pregnancy loss. But I think it's really important that you take a good history to see, because sometimes in the history you can gain more information about like these losses. Because I do have some patients that come to me and say, I've had 7 pregnancy losses. And when you actually talk to them, they're like, oh, well, my period was really heavy one time. And I know I didn't take a pregnancy test, but I think it was like a pregnancy loss. We had been trying, things like that, where I'm like, okay, I'm not going to work that up the same way as if someone is, they're consistently, they get the positive pregnancy test, maybe they go to their doctor, they have a positive HCG level, it trends down, that sort of thing. Maybe that's more suggestive of a luteal phase deficiency, which is one of the causes we'll talk about. So maybe for your test, it's probably still going to say 2 or more clinical losses, but when you're kind of working up a patient, I think taking a good history to really determine when you're going to start that evaluation is important. I don't know if she's in the audience, but Caitlin Adele did a really great presentation on recurrent pregnancy loss. I think it was about a year ago. And so this slide is from her because I liked it so much. But when you're looking at pregnancy losses, if someone has had one early pregnancy loss, 60% of those can be attributed to aneuploidy or genetic abnormalities. So it's really common that there's pregnancy loss is probably just something abnormal genetically formed with the embryo. And that's why it did not implant and didn't grow into a full pregnancy. And that's why we don't get the full evaluation or full workup when someone's just had one pregnancy loss. However, if you have recurrent pregnancy loss, based on the definition we just talked about, where it's 2 or more, then aneuploidy is less common. And that's why you want to start looking at other causes that could have led to this pregnancy loss. I like this chart because even if you've had prior miscarriages, there still is a really good chance of successful pregnancy in the next pregnancy. Like even if you don't do anything different. So the first few lines, these are women that have had a live-born infant before. So that is a better prognosis population versus someone who's never had a child before. But if they've had at least one live-born child before, then it shows you what is the risk of miscarriage in the next pregnancy. So even if you've had a successful pregnancy, you've never had a miscarriage, you still have a 12% chance in the next pregnancy. But as you guys probably know, usually the baseline risk is about 25%, so that's lower because you've had a live-born infant. But even if you've had 6 miscarriages, the risk in the next pregnancy is only 53%, which I think that's low. Like for some of these patients, even if they don't have any resources or you've done the workup and you can't find anything, a lot of times we want to give support and just encouragement of keep trying. I know it's very emotionally exhausting and we don't want anyone to go through a miscarriage, but I think that these numbers help at least provide some context. In the women who have not had at least one live-born infant, which is a lot of the patients that we see, and if they've had 2 or more miscarriages, they do have a higher risk. So a patient who's never had a live-born infant, we do, worry a little bit more than someone who has, and that's the exact definition of recurrent pregnancy loss and why we're going to go into evaluation for that, which is what we're going to talk about next. So this is from the ASRM kind of committee opinion. It's kind of like the ACOG practice bulletins, but it does this is where most of this presentation comes from, and it does a really good job of going into detail about why we do testing for each of these things. And I have in here, this is their whole box of things that can be tested for, but the ones I kind of or put the green square around are the ones that we actually test for. As you can see below that, there are other things we'll touch on, but there's no recommended testing that we do. They're just things that are, potentially could cause recurrent pregnancy loss, or there's some limited data or some data that says, hey, we've looked into this, but it doesn't really have a statistical impact on reducing recurrent pregnancy loss. But the ones that do, that we currently should be testing for, are genetic, antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, anatomic or structural issues, and then hormonal issues. So we'll go into each of those now. And then the other ones, I know the font is small, the other ones like infectious, male factors, psychological, alloimmune, environmental. Those are some that maybe have some benefit, but currently there's not enough data or evidence to say, yes, we should be testing everyone for endometritis, or we should be, testing everyone for natural killer cells. So here's just kind of the bare bones summary, and we'll talk about each of these now. So we'll start with genetic causes. So when I see a patient for recurrent pregnancy loss, I'm going through this in my head and, saying, okay, genetic, what testing can we do for them genetically? So the first test is a karyotype, and that is for both partners. So not just the female, you want to do it for the female and the male partner. It's also very important when you're taking a history to make sure, have these losses been with the same partner? Because if they, had a previous partner, then you might be ordering a karyotype on someone that isn't really necessary. But the karyotype, looking at the chromosomes of the patient and the partner, and what you're looking for is balanced translocations. We find this in usually about 7 to 10% of recurrent pregnancy loss patients. So it's not huge, but If this is found, then we definitely have an explanation for the recurrent pregnancy loss, and we can do IVF with PGT-SR, which is PGT for structural rearrangements, where you can actually identify which embryos have this translocation. What a balanced translocation is that the couple, they have all of the right chromosomal material. It's just stuck together in the wrong way. So you can see here the purple and the yellow chromosomes at the top. Part of the purple and yellow chromosome have switched. So the female or the male, they are completely normal. They don't show any signs of any abnormality. They, don't have any issues. But then when those chromosomes then segregate to make the, egg or sperm, they're segregating in an imbalanced fashion. Not all the time. You can see some will still segregate in a balanced way. If you get the two unaffected chromosomes, some will be a balanced carrier where they're just like the parent. They may have recurrent pregnancy loss when they go to get pregnant, but they themselves will still result in a healthy pregnancy. But if you have that unbalanced form, then that can cause recurrent miscarriage. And so when we're doing normal pre-implantation genetic testing for aneuploidy, the PGTA testing that's just looking at the chromosomes, it is not looking at this fine detail. It would not identify this. You have to know that there is a small structural rearrangement or a balanced translocation in order to then do basically the higher definition PGT, where you could identify this, and then we can know. And when I'm doing an embryo transfer, we preferentially say, hey, if we have a completely balanced, normal embryo, that's what we would transfer first. But then you could still, a normal unaffected, you would transfer that first, but we still would transfer a balanced as a second choice, because they're not going to clinically, it's not going to result in a miscarriage. But then, as I was saying, there could be issues with that baby then in the future having children. But then at least it's identified and it's known. And so this, not always, but with this kind of balanced translocation, you might have a stronger family history of miscarriage. Since miscarriage is so common, when I ask my patients about it, almost all of them are like, oh yeah, my mom, my grandma, once they start talking about it, you find out that a lot of people have had a miscarriage you didn't know about, but this is one that really is usually more familial. There is a specific type of balanced translocation. You guys may remember this way back to med school, called a Robertsonian translocation. And that is just a very specific balanced translocation. Well, I guess it's not balanced, but it's a specific translocation involving the acrocentric chromosome. So meaning, as you saw in this picture, like chromosomes always have the Q arm and the P arm, and the P is the petite arm, which is smaller. But the acrocentric chromosomes, the P arm is really small. So they're like really, really long Q arm, really short P arm. And so when those exchange DNA, you basically can get this tiny little combined P arm chromosome, and there's two tiny little P arms, and those are often just lost in meiosis. So you're actually losing a chromosome. And those ones are commonly happen with 13, 14, 15, 21, and 22. And that's because those are the acrocentric chromosomes. So if I see a products of conception from someone who had a miscarriage and it had a chromosomal abnormality of one of these, obviously we know that Down syndrome chromosome 21 trisomy is very common, but this is one of the ones that would be an inherited cause of recurrent having pregnancies with trisomy 21. And so this is just if you're seeing it's a very specific type of translocation that involves those specific chromosomes. And so I would be more likely to order a karyotype earlier, like if someone had one of these in their POC, like if you did genetic testing earlier than, like, say, waiting, just because there is a higher chance that they could have a Robertsonian translocation. Before we move on to antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, the other thing with chromosomes, obviously, that we were just touching on is you can do products of conception testing, and that is really important it's not always important for the first loss, although I always still would offer it to patients, but, it might not be covered by insurance. It is most likely is genetically abnormal. I'm seeing the patients who now have had multiple losses, and they're always like, oh, I wish I had done that testing. I wish I had known, but that's hindsight is 20/20. And I'm not seeing tons of patients who didn't need the testing, go on to have a completely normal pregnancy, and then never come to see me or an MFM. But I do think it's still something to offer because you don't know which category those patients are going to fall into. Antiphospholipid antibody syndrome. So this is the next condition that we always screen for with recurrent pregnancy loss. And basically the pathophysiology of this is that someone develops, it's an acquired condition, you develop antibodies against platelets and the vascular endothelium, and that can lead to thrombosis. So there can be like small clots forming in the placenta, or it can happen later on in the second or third trimester, can also lead to preeclampsia due to this abnormal vascular development. In early pregnancy, another one of the mechanisms may be that this inhibits the trophoblasts from properly invading into the uterus, and so that causes these issues. In order to meet the criteria for antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, you have to have one of the clinical criteria and laboratory criteria. And they are very specific. These, I know this list looks long. You really just need to memorize these or just refer to this frequently. But basically for the clinical criteria, it's either having a thrombus, like a personal history of a blood clot, or one of the pregnancy morbidities, which is 3 losses before 10 weeks that are unexplained. So if they've had genetics and it was a trisomy 21 or something else, that does not count. So unexplained early losses less than 10 weeks. Or you have a loss later that was morphologically normal. Again, we don't have a reason. It wasn't, because of some genetic condition we know of. It was normal, or a very preterm delivery 34 weeks earlier because of preeclampsia or eclampsia. So if you have one of those clinical criteria, and then you would then be triggered to, let's do the lab criteria, which is blood work, where we're looking for 3 different antibodies: lupus anticoagulant, anticardiolipin, and beta-2 glycoprotein. And if you do see one of those that are positive, you do have to repeat it 12 weeks later to confirm, because you can have these transient antibodies. When we do diagnose antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, the treatment is either aspirin and or anticoagulation. And that's a really personalized kind of decision. If they've had a personal thrombus, like if one of their clinical criteria is a thrombus, we do anticoagulation. If it was just pregnancy loss, then we usually do aspirin, but can sometimes still consider doing anticoagulation. But anticoagulation, having to do, Lovenox, heparin every single day. You can then have bleeding in pregnancy. There can be other issues. So it's really a personalized discussion. But I would say if they've had a personal blood clot, yes, we're going to be using the anticoagulation. If not, you might just use aspirin, but it's not wrong. I have some patients that want to do both. And so you kind of individualize that decision. Next are endocrine issues. So the 3 hormones that we're really testing for that can cause recurrent pregnancy loss. One is prolactin, and usually having a high prolactin. Prolactin is essential in maintaining the corpus luteum, which is what is producing progesterone. And if you have increased prolactin, it can actually inhibit progesterone. So this can cause pregnancy loss. And there have been studies that have shown that if you have high prolactin and recurrent pregnancy loss, and we treat you with a dopamine agonist, which would either be cabergoline or bromocriptine, it has been shown to reduce rates of recurrent pregnancy loss. So that's something easy to check, easy to treat. Not everyone, but some people with hyperprolactinemia will have like abnormal periods because of this. They can have galactorrhea and other things, but I have seen a lot of patients that don't have any symptoms at all, but do have a high prolactin. Usually if it's elevated once and it's like a mild elevation, we will repeat it one more time fasting early in the morning, because there can be different factors that affect the prolactin, but if it's still elevated, then we would treat. Another one is hyperglycemia. So the easiest way to check is a hemoglobin A1C. You could obviously do like a, fasting blood sugar or one of the glucose tolerance tests, but it's really if it's an undiagnosed, like someone who has diabetes or has had really high blood sugar and therefore insulin levels, and it hasn't been unaware of it. So it's an easy test to do. I've not, I think, ever found someone who just had raging diabetes and didn't know about it, but it can happen. And really you want the A1C to be less than 7%. So that's another screening test we do. Hypo or hyperthyroidism. So ASRM also recently changed the guidelines on this, because one of the biggest studies that was used to warrant treatment for infertility patients, not recurrent pregnancy loss and infertility are different categories, but one of them was found to be fraudulent. And so they basically took it out of all their meta-analyses. And so it's really actually controversial whether you should be treating subclinical I'm sorry, that's a typo there. Hypo, not hyper. If it's hyper, you should always be treating it. Hypo. So you guys probably know like the numbers that you always hear, like if you're infertile or trying to, get pregnant, you want a TSH less than 2.5. So like a subclinical hypothyroidism, you would treat that. Whereas that is really not the case. It's if the TSH is above 4 or whatever your lab's normal limit is. And so our limit at VCU is around there. If it's above 4, then that would be considered subclinical hypothyroidism, and you should treat the TSH to get less than 2.5. If your TSH is 2.9 or your TSH is 3, it is completely fine. You don't need to do anything. It's if it's over that 4, that's when you want to get it to less than 2.5. So I see a lot of patients that are on levothyroxine and they don't need to be. And then even that now is kind of being questioned, but I would say most people that I've talked to are still treating subclinical, but just kind of a newer area. But I would say for your testing, if the TSH is above 4, that's roughly what the normal is for most labs. That's when you would want to treat. And then the last endocrine issue is not something you can test for, but luteal phase deficiency. This is very rare, but I would say a lot of people have heard about it and ask about it, and almost all my patients think they have it, and they all want progesterone. But luteal phase deficiency is when you basically have a very short luteal phase. It should be normal 14 days. So once you ovulate, 14 days later, you should be pregnant or get your period. If you, after ovulation, if that is less than 10 days, so if it's 9 days, or less, that can be a sign of luteal phase deficiency, that for whatever reason, your corpus luteum is not producing sufficient progesterone. And so those patients can benefit from luteal phase progesterone supplementation. So you would start the progesterone after ovulation and then hope that, once you get to that 2-week mark, they should not have gotten their period yet, even if they're not pregnant, because they have plenty of progesterone. And then you would test and see whether they're pregnant or not, and then stop it if not. So I've seen some people go to like reproductive pharmacists and things, and they put them on a daily progesterone because they say the progesterone is low, and that is a terrible idea and does not help and will actually work as a contraceptive, just like any progesterone only contraceptive pill. And I would say it's very rare that this is actually a thing. Some people are like, oh yeah, my period comes like 12 or 13 days after. I'm like, that's still in a normal range. I wouldn't treat for that, but that is something just to be aware of too. But we can't test for it. Progesterone levels fluctuate. It's pulsatile. It's, you would literally have to have like a continuous progesterone monitor to see if someone's progesterone is actually low. So we do not check progesterone levels other than to confirm ovulation, single level at the right time of the month, usually day 21. It should be over 3. That's the only time that we really check progesterone levels. Okay, and then we have structural causes of recurrent pregnancy loss. So the 2 main ways you can identify structural issues are hysterosalpingogram and 3D saline infusion ultrasound. And it's not wrong to do both. They both give you different information. I don't have a one go-to of like, I always start with this one and then do this one. I really kind of base it on their history, and also if there is any infertility also, like maybe they've had pregnancy losses, but it took them over a year to actually get pregnant and then they had the loss, and there is more of an infertility picture too. I would probably prefer starting with the hysterosalpingogram so we can also assess tubal patency. But if I do their baseline ultrasound and I'm seeing big fibroids or something, then maybe I would kind of start with the saline ultrasound, where you're going to get a much better view of the inside cavity of the uterus. Although you do get an idea of that on hysterosalpingogram, it's just that you can't see the myometrium. So you really can't tell if something is like for the uterine anomalies, you can't tell, is this a septum? Is this a bicornuate uterus? Is this didelphys? It's really hard to tell on hysterosalpingogram, but if you saw something abnormal, then you could refer to do the saline ultrasound. This is a quick CREOG question about structural causes of recurrent pregnancy loss. So you have a 32-year-old woman. She's a G4P0. She's had 3 first trimester spontaneous abortions and 1 second trimester spontaneous abortion presents to your office. This patient currently is not pregnant and wants to determine the cause of the recurrent pregnancy loss and prevent another miscarriage. Laboratory workup for recurrent pregnancy loss, including TSH, hemoglobin A1C, antiphospholipid antibody panel, karyotypes for both parents, those are all normal. So really, everything we just talked about, she's done all the testing and it's normal. Her HSG is demonstrated on the right. I kind of slid the pictures around, but you can see that X-ray picture on the right. And then she also got a 3D saline ultrasound on the left. The best next step in the management of this patient is? Any guesses? So for this one, you can't tell with the HSG alone. Oh, were you going to answer?
Someone in the audience said C.
C?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. So that is not the correct answer, but I understand why you're picking that one, because if you have a congenital uterine anomaly, some of them are associated with renal anomalies. But this patient has a septum. So here, you know it's a septum because this is the, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but yeah, you can, I don't think. In the saline ultrasound image, you can see the myometrium and you can see the little tiny caliper that they put. It's probably really hard to see, but it's measuring the myometrial indentation. And so this is a septum because there's no indentation in the myometrium. The top of the uterus myometrium is flat. And septums are not associated with congenital renal anomalies. Septums are just a lack of reabsorption of the two kind of, when the two sides of the uterus meet together, that it doesn't, the little, band of tissue in between them doesn't get reabsorbed, versus a didelphys uterus. Those are basically happen earlier in embryologic development and are very closely related to the urologic system. So those are associated with renal anomalies. But if it is just a septum, you do not need to do any other imaging. They're not associated with renal issues. But if it's any of those other complicated, like double cervix, didelphys, bicornuate, those ones are associated with renal anomalies. So for this one, the answer is D, operative hysteroscopy, because with a septum, you just need to go in and remove it. It is definitely a cause of recurrent pregnancy loss, and you can remove it just with hysteroscopy. You can use laparoscopic guidance if needed, but if you've diagnosed it and you know what it is in advance, you don't need laparoscopic guidance because you can just keep cutting until you get to the top of the fundus and you can see both cornua, and then you're done. When we did our Kriog review, I had used the same question, and someone had asked me what the Strassman procedure was. And so I did look it up in the meantime, if anyone's curious. It's not something that is ever done anymore, but it's for basically bicornuate uteruses when people used to surgically try to put the two cornua together, like literally just like a, if you're closing up a myomectomy or something, they would literally just like slice into the uterus and sew it together. And it is not recommended. If you have a bicornuate uterus, then it does have pregnancy morbidity, but there's unfortunately nothing we can do to improve that. So you either continue trying to get pregnant and hope it works out, or you use a gestational carrier, which is what I would recommend. So for a septum, there are different guidelines based on ASRM, ESHRA. There's all these different ways to diagnose it, but basically this is what I was trying to describe. I should have just come to this picture, is that if it's a septum, there's not going to be an indentation in the myometrium, versus bicornuate. That's where there is an indentation in the myometrium. So that's why you can't identify these on HSG, because you cannot see the myometrium at all. An arcuate is a normal variant. It's basically a heart-shaped uterus where this little indentation is less than a centimeter. No clinical, concerns, doesn't cause miscarriage, no intervention. But if it's a septum, which is greater than 1.5 centimeters, and they do also base it on the angle, I don't think they would get into that much detail for your guys' purpose. It's just you really need to know myometrium involved or not. Okay, so that was all of the things we test for. That's what you should be doing when you're working up someone for recurrent pregnancy loss. These are some of the other things that we kind of touched on that is not wrong to go into, but it's not something that's like, hey, these are the labs we should do. So other things that can cause increased recurrent pregnancy loss, which these ones, it's really hard, I feel like, to mention to patients, because I never want a patient to think that they caused their pregnancy loss, and you still don't know. Even if the patient is a heavy smoker, I still don't know if that was the cause. But these are, lifestyle factors that can be modified that could have an impact. So if someone is a heavy smoker, it does increase the rate of miscarriage, and they think this is due to vasoconstriction, also how the blood vessels are forming when the patient is getting pregnant. Same with alcohol. We know obviously fetal alcohol syndrome is a devastating, impact of being a very heavy alcohol user. But even if you're just drinking 2 drinks a day, that can still increase your risk of spontaneous abortion. So this would be more probably someone didn't know they were pregnant and then had a miscarriage. And then caffeine. I always tell my patients just to do the same requirements or the same restrictions as when they're actually pregnant for caffeine, because there have been like very high doses or very high intake of caffeine has been associated with an increased risk in pregnancy loss. And so usually I just say, hey, just, stick with the 200 milligrams a day or less. You don't have to cut out caffeine entirely, but if there's someone that really just wants to do everything and reduce the chance that could be having an impact, then there have been some studies that have shown that is helpful. As far as infectious, so there are some infections that, could be potentially associated with miscarriage, but the problem is that there hasn't been good data on if you find one of these infections, ureaplasma, mycoplasma, toxoplasma, if you find one of these and you treat it, that actually can improve the outcome. Previously, I think it was before, definitely when I was in training, this was something that was pretty standard. And so I think a lot of older REI physicians will still do a biopsy. And I still, Kayla's on my rotation right now. She'll see I've treated a lot of people for empiric chronic endometritis when we really have nothing else to treat. But it's not one of those things that you should really be routinely ordering. I would say it's case by case basis. If someone's had history of a lot of vaginal infections or bacterial vaginosis, or sometimes you've literally done such an extensive workup, they're still having pregnancy losses, that this might be something that you want to look into. There are, other than just doing an endometrial biopsy, where you want to ask for CD138 staining to look for the plasma cells to identify chronic endometritis. There is a fancy new test that's put out by the same company that does the ERA, the endometrial receptivity assay, which I also am not a fan of, but they literally have this panel of like hundreds of different bacteria that they're checking for, that I have a lot of patients that ask and want that because they want to, they've heard about it, they want to do absolutely everything. But whether this is really helpful or not, still to be determined. For the male side of things, as you know, all of these things we talked about, other than karyotype, are really focusing on the female. This, I think, is very promising. And when I was at ASRM this fall, they were talking more about how they might actually add this to the guidelines, that sperm DNA fragmentation, they have found, is associated with recurrent pregnancy loss. And what sperm DNA fragmentation is basically in the, sperm, if they have a significant amount of their DNA that is abnormal, fragmented, just, poor quality, that those patients have a higher risk of pregnancy loss. The only problem is there aren't great interventions right now for reducing sperm DNA fragmentation. So if you find it, and this is not on a normal semen analysis, you have to do a special send out lab where they're identifying this. But if you do identify it, really, like vitamins, like lifestyle changes, none of those things have been proven to help. Really, the only option you have is to do a testicular sperm extraction, a TESE, which is a really huge major procedure and kind of jumping to something really aggressive to basically get the sperm out of the testicle before it's had time to travel through the whole male reproductive system, because that's where a lot of the sperm DNA damage occurs. It's like during that maturation process through the reproductive tract, which takes about 60 or 70 days to go through there. So if you do a surgical sperm extraction, you could theoretically get, sperm with a lower DNA fragmentation that could be used for IVF only. You can't do IUI or natural conception with testicularly extracted sperm. But I think this is something that could show some promise in the future. And I have ordered this test on some of my patients who really have, again, nothing else going on, but had some slight abnormalities on their semen analysis, that this is where we might look next. Especially, I always counsel them up front, if we find this, you don't have to do it, but the only really intervention we can do is this surgical procedure. And a lot of times they're like, oh no, I'm not going to do that. It's expensive. It's, it's a surgery, but it is an option. Okay, we've got a Creole question, and I think this is my last part of the slide, so then we can do some questions before we move into the next section. But we've got a 28-year-old G3P0030. She's presenting after her third first trimester pregnancy loss. She had 2 DNCs, after which POCs were sent for genetic testing with normal results. Her workup included normal test results for TSH, prolactin, anticardiolipin antibodies, lupus anticoagulant, and anti-beta-2 glycoprotein 1 antibodies. Findings with hysterosalpingography are normal. Karyotypes performed on both partners are normal. The best next step in management of this patient during her next pregnancy is A, close monitoring, B, empiric aspirin therapy, C, high-dose corticosteroids, D, intravenous immunoglobulin therapy, or E, low molecular weight heparin therapy. So the answer is A, close monitoring. So after all those things we talked about, they did all the testing and it was all normal. And this is what I would say happens for 90% of my patients that I see for recurrent pregnancy loss is, and here, I mean, so I'm exaggerating. What the numbers say is about 50 to 75% of patients will have a negative workup for RPL. I feel like it's more than that, but basically you've done all this workup, you can't find an answer. There's really nothing we can do. It's kind of depressing, but close monitoring, doing early ultrasounds, just giving them reassurance that, hey, even without us finding an answer, your next pregnancy is most likely to be normal, is really what we can do. We should not be using some of these other treatments unnecessarily. A lot of patients, they want to do something. They're kind of sad that they haven't found an answer. And understandably, if they don't have an answer, they're afraid they're going to have another pregnancy loss. But at least currently, none of these other things should be used, just empirically. The immunoglobulins, we didn't really talk about that. There are reproductive immunologists that I would say it's kind of a newer field, and there's definitely not a training path for that. It's people that have kind of self-taught that will do these huge panels of immune testing and then say, oh, you need to do this immune therapy, you need to do, IVIG, PRP, but there's not good data that that's helpful, and it can actually be very dangerous. So a lot of the times we just have to provide support. Okay, that's all I got. Any questions?
No immediate questions, but thank you so much, Dr. New, for your time this morning. Pull up my slide. Zealand, can you see my slides? Yes, no, maybe so.
I can see and hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Dr. New, for that feedback. Okay, all right. I'm Aisha. You all know me. The presentation today will focus on primary ovarian insufficiency. In the fall, I gave a presentation on menopause and briefly touched on this, but this presentation will kind of go more into the depths of it all. All right, so just to ensure that we're bringing back some of that previous information that we discussed during my presentation in the fall, we'll just briefly go through the definitions of perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. Perimenopause is that time frame that's leading to menopause where women start to experience a decrease in their ovarian function. Menopause is officially defined as a cessation of menstruation for 12 months. And again, it's secondary to a loss of ovarian activity. And postmenopause is after menopause, hence the name. And it marks the end of reproductive years and ovarian function. We have different types, primary ovarian insufficiency, quote unquote, natural menopause or induced menopause, where someone may have surgery where they have their ovaries removed for a myriad of reasons, or if someone were to undergo chemoradiation, causing essentially affecting the ovaries and their inability to provide the hormones that the body needs. So specifically for today, we're focusing on primary ovarian insufficiency and how is that defined? Well, according to ASRM and their evidence-based guidelines, thank you so much, Dr. Nee, for sharing those with me. It is a clinical condition that is characterized by loss of ovarian function. It's indicated by irregular menstrual cycles, and this is confirmed by labs before the age of 40. And that time frame of before the age of 40 is very important for someone to get the diagnosis of this, and we'll get more into the diagnosis later. So I want to start off by going through symptoms, because thinking about this in a logical way, if you have a patient who comes into clinic with these symptoms, maybe this is something that you want to include on your differential. So if a patient comes in and they're, expressing vasomotor symptoms with POI, you're going to experience hot flashes, you're going to experience some night sweats. And again, this is all due to a low estrogen state. We also have GSM or genital urinary syndrome of menopause, where the patient may express concern for vaginal atrophy or dryness, or having painful intercourse, or even having UTIs. And there's also the psychological symptoms that one may experience in regards to having mood swings, depression, anxiety that maybe they had at baseline or they didn't have at baseline, or maybe this is a worsening formation of it, insomnia and brain fog. Patients can have these symptoms obviously outside of POI, but it's really important to really differentiate and get down to the nitty gritty of the root of it, and including POI on your differential is important if they have the other symptoms as well. Also, infertility. If you have a reproductive age woman who is struggling to get pregnant, this diagnosis can also be on your differential. Okay. So what are the diagnostic criteria for POI? One, you have to have irregular menstrual cycles for at least 4 months. You have an FSH that is greater than 25, and you have to have the FSH repeated in 4 to 6 weeks if there is concern for diagnostic uncertainty. You'll see that in the diagnostic criteria, they are not quoting an estradiol level. It can be added as an additional lab to help round out your workup for this diagnosis, but it's not officially a part of the diagnostic criteria. And kind of going into additional labs that one could order to further round out the workup is AMH. You can do a karyotype analysis, and this is recommended for patients who are having symptoms that could be consistent with POI, but they're under 30, and you want to ensure that there aren't additional genetic causes that could be contributing to this, such as Turner syndrome or Fragile X mutation. You also want to test for thyroid and adrenal autoantibodies. Important considerations as OB/GYNs, we always have to exclude pregnancy, so get that pregnancy test in clinic. Also, see whether or not the patient is on hormonal therapy, so are they on OCP, usually they have an IUD, specifically the Mirena. or Lilac, whichever progestin IUD they may be using. And they may need to have them go through a trial of stopping that birth control option so that you can get a full and appropriate diagnosis for the patient. And again, just mentioning before, consistent with estradiol levels, that in itself cannot be the only marker for lab workup or a diagnosis. The ASRM evidence-based guideline has great like flow sheet, which was really nice to see as I was preparing for this presentation. And I won't go through all the different boxes, but just wanted to know that in addition to our practice bulletins, if you do have a patient that may have a concern that is in the realm of REI and you kind of want to start the workup prior to them getting into REI, if you place a referral, that we still have this as a great resource to reference to see how we can ensure that we're doing all the right things. So just quickly, this is going through, they had a bilateral oophorectomy before age 40, and obviously we know that is iatrogenic because we have removed her ovaries. With POI, again, testing whether or not they've had previous chemotherapy, radiation, the genetic testing that we briefly discussed in terms of getting a chromosomal analysis, and then seeing if they need even further genetic workup is important. And then also getting those autoimmune tests again to see what would be the potential etiology for their presenting symptoms. Okay, so you've gone through all of this. You have the diagnosis, the patient has met diagnostic criteria, they're less than 40, they have the labs that are consistent with it. Okay, so what do we do? Recommendations for management. You can do hormone replacement therapy, and this is to help specifically with the vasomotor symptoms that are associated with POI. This should be your first line treatment for patients to prevent the complications of an estrogen deficiency. This is recommended until the patient hits 50, unless there are other contraindications that they may have for HRT. The regimen options include estrogen plus progestin if the uterus is present. Again, this helps protect against endometrial hyperplasia. You can do estrogen alone if they are post hysterectomy. And then there are different routes for HRT. In my presentation in the fall, I went, Dr. Barrows and I did our diagnosis together in the shared drive. Dr. Barrows has a great presentation on the different routes of HRT. I will not get into that today, but if just for future reference, or if you wanted to review for pre-auths, that is also out there as well. All right, fertility considerations. You can have spontaneous ovulation, and that pregnancy can still occur in approximately 5 to 10% of patients. However, first line fertility treatment is donor egg. IVF is the most effective option for these patients. And if the patient really wanted to primarily use their own egg, it's important to include in the counseling that IVF with their own eggs is typically ineffective, and that may be something that is really hard for patients to hear, but is the appropriate counseling for them. However, with medicine always evolving, there's research being done that's in the realm of stem cell therapy, also looking at ovarian tissue cryopreservation and in vitro activation. So in other words, more to come if the funding for all this research does not get cut. In regards to things that are important when you're thinking about these patients, since they are in a state of estrogen deficiency, we have to make sure that their whole body as well. So considering bone health and cardiovascular protection. Starting them on high doses of calcium and vitamin D, encouraging weight-bearing exercise and healthy lifestyle modifications, and also a DEXA scan for bone mineral density monitoring. Psychosocial support is really important. Unfortunately, these patients have a higher prevalence of depression, anxiety, and sometimes lower quality of life, just given the fact that they are so young and dealing with a lot of these symptoms. And so providing them with counseling and support is essential, and also ensure that you're screening for depression and anxiety. And then again, As I mentioned before, the ASRM guideline has a great flow sheet on the different ways in which you can assess and manage all the different symptoms associated with POI. So again, I won't go into all the nitty-gritty details of everything, but this is a quick reference. You know, as OBGYNs, we love a good algorithm, and here's one. All right, so we have some prologue questions that we're going to get into. Can I have someone read the questions down for me, please?
A 23-year-old woman presents to your office with a history of secondary amenorrhea. She had menarche at age 12 and primary ovarian insufficiency was diagnosed at age 19. She has a fragile X coded by the FMR1 gene, premutation carrier. Her 36-year-old sister has a child with adult developmental delay. She currently takes OCPs. For her to have healthy offspring, the option most likely to be successful is anonymous donor oocytes, donor eggs from her sister, clomiphene citrate, a gestational carrier, or gonadotropins.
Do you have any thoughts on what the answer would be? Thank you. I'm hearing A. You're right. Okay, so basically, this patient has POI, and as we mentioned beforehand, the best chance for her to have a healthy offspring is for her to use donor eggs. Okay, next question.
A 29-year-old patient presents with secondary amenorrhea and expresses a desire for fertility. Her family history is significant for a maternal uncle and maternal aunt with a tremor/ataxia syndrome. She is 5'8" with a BMI of 24.
I just did copy paste from prologue.
Her blood pressure is 110/64. Her FSH concentration was 112 1 month ago and is now 92.
We're still sorry.
Her estradiol concentration is less than 20, and her thyroid-stimulating hormone concentration, prolactin concentration, and karyotype are normal. The next best laboratory test to order for this patient is. That's it.
Okay, and that's correct. Wonderful. Okay, any questions about that? No, okay.
I think that was a hard one because the other answers are still things we do for POI, but they were obviously leaning towards FMR1 because it can cause the tremor ataxia syndrome. So that is the best answer. But we typically do offer, or do when you were talking about it before, the anti-adrenal antibodies, anti-hydroxylase antibodies, those are a test for working at POI. But they were asking for this because of the ataxia history.
Thank you for that, Dr. New. Okay. This may or may not be the last question, I can't remember. Anyone can jump forward and read. I guess. It's.
I think that was hard too because it's not a POI, so I think everyone's thinking POI, but I think this person probably has an XY karyotype is my suspicion, based on they have the signs of having high androgens, but their estradiol is actually low. So I'm wondering if this is a 46. I can't hear you.
As well.
Attention, please. There is one fire alarm activated in the building. Please stay calm and follow the direction of staff. Your attention, please. There is one fire alarm activated in the building. Please stay calm and follow the direction of staff.
Can you guys hear me? I still can't hear you, but can you hear me? No.
Your attention, please. There is one fire alarm activated in the building. Please stay calm and follow the direction of staff.
Okay, if you guys need to leave because of the sirens, please do. But I just wanted to, is this your last slide? I wanted to tell you good job and also just do some other highlights.
Your attention, please. There's been a fire alarm activated in the building. Please stay calm and follow the direction of staff.
Okay, great job. This POI is one of the, oh, so cute. Love it. POI is one of the hardest, I think, diagnoses for patients to accept because, as you were saying, because of the impact on infertility. And I want you guys to all be aware of this when you do have patients with secondary amenorrhea, because I've had a lot of patients who they have been told they have PCOS and that's why they're not having periods. So it's really important to get an accurate diagnosis, get the labs. If you're not sure, if it seems a little unusual, send them to REI, because that 5 to 10%.
May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire alarm activated in the building. Please.
What Dr. Nee was saying, it's really important to patients.
Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There's been a fire alarm
Is within
in
the
the building.
first year
Please
diagnosis.
stay calm and follow
A
the
lot
direction of
of
staff.
times, if they have been misdiagnosed with PCOS, by the time they make it to me, it's 100% too late and they're not going to get pregnant on their own. It's during that initial diagnosis when the FSH is just starting to fluctuate and they might shoot off a few eggs here and there. And then after that, they're just out of eggs. So it's really important to do the diagnosis early. And most of the time, it's based on those low estrogen symptoms. So if you ask them about the menopausal symptoms, most of them will have these at the beginning, and then their body just gets used to it and they've forgotten they ever had those symptoms. And then they're just basically in menopause, but without knowing it. The other thing is that estrogen is not part of the criteria, but you should always send an estrogen when you're doing an FSH, because in the rare case that the FSH is high because they're literally about to ovulate, then their estrogen will be really high too. So that's just good to know. And I will say the biggest difference, like you touched on with the new criteria, is that you don't have to repeat the FSH again if you're really confident. Before, you had to repeat it again, like at least a month later to confirm the diagnosis. All of my patients always want to repeat it because they don't want to believe it, and they want to repeat it 3 or 4 times. They want to literally repeat it every month because they don't believe it, but you really don't have to repeat it if they meet all the other symptoms. So I would just say, yeah, just be aware of this. It's pretty rare, but I do see a surprising number of people for it. And then, you know, really the only option at that point is usually I say, try on your own. Do it for however long you want. There's no rush. You do not have the time clock like you do with donor eggs. So when they're ready emotionally, put them on estrogen. Once they're ready, we can talk about donor eggs, but a lot of them do want to take a time period where they do just kind of try on their own. But I've yet to have someone who's been successful with that.
Please stay calm and follow direction of staff.
What Dr. New was saying is that. That.
Attention, please. In the building. Stay calm and follow direction of staff.
A good way to do. And that.
In the building. Please stay calm and follow direction of staff.
To even confirm the diagnosis. Here, but thank you so much for.
Thank you guys. I can't really hear well, but I think you said thank you. So send an email if you have any more questions.
Stay calm and follow direction of staff.